Get that outdated rag off the rack, old man. The clerk's voice sliced through the quiet hum of the thrift store, sharp as a bayonet and dripping with disdain. The words hung in the air, heavy, like the musty scent of old wool and mothballs that clung to the rows of secondhand clothes. Behind the counter, a young man, barely out of his teens, with a name tag reading Tyler pinned crookedly to his faded polo, leaned forward, his smirk as bold as the neon sale signs plastered across the store's grimy windows. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the cracked linoleum floor where 78-year-old Elias Carter stood, frozen, his weathered hands gripping a faded military uniform. Elias's eyes, cloudy with age but sharp with memory, flicked up to meet Tyler's. The uniform, a Vietnam-era jacket, its olive-drab fabric worn thin at the elbows but still adorned with a single bronze star, felt sacred in his hands. He'd found it buried under a pile of polyester shirts, its weight pulling him back to jungles thick with rain and fear, tonight spent clutching a rifle under a sky torn by tracer fire. He wasn't shopping for himself. No, Elias had come to this rundown strip mall in Columbus, Ohio to buy the jacket for a young vet he'd met at the VA hospital. A kid half his age, broken by war and too proud to ask for help. Elias thought the uniform might remind him of who he'd been before the world chewed him up. The store was nearly empty, save for a mother rummaging through kids' shoes in the corner and an elderly woman inspecting teacups by the register. Outside, the late afternoon sun baked the asphalt, sending waves of heat shimmering off parked cars. Elias had walked 2 miles to get here, his bad knee throbbing with every step because the bus didn't run this far out on Sundays. He'd planned to pay for the jacket, maybe grab a coffee at the diner next door and head back to his one-bedroom apartment before the evening chill set in. But now Tyler's words landed like a grenade, and the air in the store felt charged, ready to ignite. "Excuse me?" Elias's voice was low, steady, but there was steel in it, a tone honed by decades of surviving worse than a punk clerk's attitude. His fingers tightened on the uniform, the coarse fabric grounding him as his heart thudded in his chest. He stood a little straighter, his slight frame still carrying the posture of a soldier. The pain in his knee faded, drowned out by a surge of indignation. He'd faced ambushes, lost brothers, and carried their dog tags home. Yet here, in a thrift store of all places, he was being mocked for honoring that same service. Tyler rolled his eyes, popping gum with a loud smack. "You heard me. That thing's ancient, like you. Nobody wants it. Put it back before you ruin it." He gestured lazily toward the rack, his voice loud enough to draw the mother's glance from across the store. Her eyes darted between Elias and Tyler before she looked away, pulling her son closer. The elderly woman by the teacups frowned but said nothing, her hands trembling as she set a cup down. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint tick of a wall clock and the distant rumble of a motorcycle outside. Elias felt the weight of their stares, or lack thereof, like a physical blow. His chest tightened, not from age or exertion but from a familiar sting, the dismissal, the erasure of everything he'd fought for. He remembered the day he'd come home from Vietnam, 22 years old, stepping off a plane to jeers and spit from a crowd that called him baby killer. He'd buried that hurt deep, but now it clawed its way back, raw and aching. For a moment he doubted himself. Maybe he was just a foolish old man clinging to relics nobody cared about. But then his thumb brushed the bronze star on the jacket, and he saw the face of that young vet, hollow-eyed but hungry for hope. No, this wasn't about him. This was about something bigger. "Son," Elias said, his voice calm but firm, "this uniform ain't a rag. It's a story. Men died for it. I'm buying it, and I'd appreciate you ringing it up." He reached for his wallet, pulling out a worn leather billfold with hands that shook, not from fear but from the effort to keep his anger in check. The wallet held a faded photo of his platoon, tucked behind a VA card and a few crumpled bills. He set it on the counter, the photo peeking out, a silent testament to the weight of his words. Tyler snorted, crossing his arms. "Story? Save it for the nursing home, Grandpa. That thing's worth less than the lint in your pocket. Store policy. Manager's gotta approve old junk like that." He jerked his thumb toward a door marked Employees Only, where a radio blared a pop song Elias didn't recognize. "And she ain't here, so tough luck." His smirk widened as if he'd won some petty victory. The mother in the corner whispered something to her son and hurried toward the exit, avoiding Elias's gaze. The elderly woman clutched her teacup, her lips moving silently, as if praying for the tension to break. Elias's jaw clenched. He could feel the heat rising in his face, the urge to slam his fist on the counter and demand respect. But he'd learned long ago that anger alone didn't win battles. He took a slow breath, the air tasting of dust and regret, and fixed Tyler with a look that had once made recruits snap to attention. "Then call her," he said, each word deliberate. "I ain't leaving without this jacket." Tyler hesitated, his smirk faltering for a split second before he doubled down. "You're wasting my time, old man. Keep it up, and I'll call security instead." He reached for the phone on the counter, his fingers hovering over the buttons, daring Elias to push back. The clock ticked louder, each second stretching the moment taut. Outside, the motorcycle's rumble grew closer, joined by others, a low, steady roar that vibrated through the store's thin walls. Elias stood his ground, the uniform still in his hands, its bronze star glinting under the fluorescent lights. He didn't know what would happen next, but he felt a spark of defiance ignite in his chest, a fire that had carried him through war and loss and years of being overlooked. Whatever came, he wasn't backing down. "We've only just begun this story, but trust me, it's about to get even more intense." Stick around to see what happens when Elias faces an even greater injustice. The thrift store's air grew thick, heavy with the scent of stale fabric and the electric hum of tension. Elias Carter stood at the counter, his gnarled hands still clutching the Vietnam-era uniform, its bronze star catching the flicker of the overhead lights. The clerk, Tyler, leaned back in his chair, phone in hand, his smug grin daring Elias to make a move. The threat of security hung between them like a loaded rifle, and the distant roar of motorcycles outside, now a steady growl, seemed to pulse in time with Elias's heartbeat. He wasn't backing down, not after a lifetime of fighting battles harder than this. "Last chance, old man," Tyler said, his voice laced with mock pity. He tapped the phone against the counter, each clack a taunt. "Put the jacket back or I'm calling in the big guns." "You don't want that, trust me." His eyes flicked to the uniform, then back to Elias as if sizing up a relic too stubborn to know its place. The elderly woman by the teacups gasped softly, her hands tightening around a chipped porcelain cup, but she stayed silent, her gaze darting nervously between the two men. The store felt smaller now, the walls closing in, the ticking clock on the wall counting down to an explosion. Elias's chest burned, not from age, but from the injustice searing through him. He'd seen this kind of arrogance before, in bureaucrats who denied his benefits, in strangers who sneered at his VA cap, in a world that seemed to forget what men like him had sacrificed. But this was different. This wasn't just about him. It was about the young vet at the VA, the kid who'd lost his leg and his hope, who needed this jacket to remember he was still a soldier. Elias's grip on the uniform tightened, the coarse fabric anchoring him. "I told you, son," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm buying this. Call whoever you gotta call." Tyler's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of irritation. He punched a number into the phone, muttering, "Fine, have it your way." As he spoke, the door marked "Employees Only" creaked open, and a woman in her 40s, presumably the manager, stepped out, her face pinched with annoyance. Her name tag read Karen, and her hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to tug at her scowl. She crossed her arms, her acrylic nails glinting under the lights. "What's the problem here, Tyler?" she snapped, her eyes narrowing at Elias. "We don't have time for this." Tyler gestured at Elias with a lazy wave. "This guy's causing a scene, Karen. Won't put back that old army junk. Says he's buying it, but I told him it's gotta be approved. He's holding up the line." There was no line, just the elderly woman, now inching toward the exit, and a teenage boy who'd wandered in, filming the scene on his phone with a grin. Elias felt the weight of their eyes, the heat of being judged, dismissed. His bad knee throbbed, but he stood taller, refusing to let the pain show. Karen sighed, stepping closer to the counter. She glanced at the uniform, her lip curling slightly. "Sir, that item's not priced yet. Store policy requires manager approval for specialty items, and I don't have time to deal with it right now." Her tone was clipped, professional, but it carried the same condescension as Tyler's. She didn't see a veteran. She saw an inconvenience. "Put it back and we can sort this out later. Or leave. Your choice." Elias's jaw clenched. He felt the old anger rising, the kind that had kept him alive in the jungle, but he tempered it with a slow breath. The air tasted of dust and regret, and for a moment he saw his platoon in that faded photo in his wallet. Smiling, fearless, gone. He touched the wallet in his pocket, grounding himself. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but unyielding, "this ain't just a jacket. It's for a boy who served, same as I did. I got the money. Name your price." Karen's eyes flicked to Tyler, then back to Elias. "It's not about the money," she said, her voice hardening. "You're disrupting my store. If you don't comply, I'll have to call security." She nodded at Tyler, who smirked and dialed again, this time speaking louder. "Yeah, we need someone at the thrift on Main. Got a guy causing trouble." The teenager with the phone snickered, zooming in on Elias while the elderly woman finally fled, her teacup abandoned on the shelf. The motorcycles outside roared louder, their engines vibrating through the floor, but no one inside seemed to notice. Elias's heart pounded, a drumbeat of defiance and fear. He'd faced worse, mortars, ambushes, the screams of men he couldn't save. But this felt personal, a betrayal by the very country he'd bled for. He wanted to shout, to tell them about the nights he'd spent crawling through mud, about the friends he'd buried, about the kid at the VA who deserved better than their scorn. But words felt useless against their indifference. Instead, he laid the uniform gently on the counter, not in surrender, but as a challenge. "I ain't leaving," he said, meeting Karen's gaze. "Do what you gotta do." Karen's face reddened. "That's it," she snapped. "Tyler, lock the front door. Nobody's buying anything until this is resolved." Tyler hesitated, glancing at the teenager who was still filming, but he obeyed, striding to the glass door and twisting the lock with a loud click. The store felt like a cage now, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry wasps. Elias stood alone, the uniform between him and the two employees, his shadow long and defiant on the linoleum floor. Suddenly, the teenager's phone pinged and he gasped, his eyes wide. "Yo, check this out," he said, holding up the screen. Karen ignored him, but Tyler glanced over, his smirk fading. The kid shoved the phone toward them, showing a live stream, his video of Elias, already racking up views on some app Elias didn't know. Comments scrolled fast. "Respect the vet." "This is messed up. Where's this at?" The teenager grinned, sensing drama. "Y'all are going viral, man. People are pissed." Karen's scowl deepened, but before she could respond, a sharp rap on the glass door made everyone jump. Outside, the motorcycles, 5, maybe 6, had pulled up, their engines idling with a throaty rumble. The riders, young men in ROTC uniforms, stood in a line, their faces stern under the brim of their caps. One held an American flag, its stripes rippling in the evening breeze. A crowd was forming behind them, passers-by, diner patrons, even a few kids on bikes, drawn by the noise and the sight of the cadets. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Let the man buy the jacket," and others murmured in agreement. Inside, Elias felt a flicker of hope, but he kept his face steady, his eyes locked on Karen. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the phone as Tyler muttered, "What the hell is this?" The teenager kept filming, his phone capturing every second of the escalating standoff. The cadets knocked again, harder, and one stepped forward, his voice muffled but firm through the glass. "Open the door, now." The store was a powder keg, and Elias stood at its center, the uniform a symbol of everything he'd fought for and everything he was still fighting for. He didn't know what would happen next, but he felt the tide shifting, the weight of the crowd's anger pressing against the locked door. "We're on the edge of the climax now. What happens next will flip everything upside down." You can't miss the resolution of this story. The thrift store's locked glass door rattled under another sharp knock, the sound echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. Outside, the ROTC cadets stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces carved with resolve, the American flag in one cadet's hands snapping in the evening breeze. The crowd behind them swelled, diner patrons, shopkeepers, kids on bikes, and now a news van pulling up, its antenna glinting in the fading light. Inside, Elias Carter stood firm, the Vietnam-era uniform on the counter between him and the manager Karen, whose face had gone pale. Tyler, the clerk, hovered behind her, his earlier smirk replaced by a nervous twitch. The teenager filming on his phone panned between the door and Elias, his live stream buzzing with comments. "This is unreal. Honor the vet." The air was thick with dust and defiance, and Elias felt it, the moment where everything could break or be made whole. Karen's hand trembled as she gripped the phone, her voice cracking as she whispered to Tyler, "What do we do?" The cadets knocked again, louder, and the lead cadet, a tall young man with a jaw like granite, called through the glass, "Open this door, ma'am. We're not leaving until you do right by this man." The crowd roared in agreement, a wave of voices chanting, "Let him buy it! Let him buy it!" A woman in a diner apron held up a sign scrawled on a napkin, "Respect our vets." Elias's chest tightened, not with fear now, but with a warmth he hadn't felt in years, pride, raw and unyielding. He touched the uniform's bronze star, its cool metal grounding him. In his mind, he saw the young vet at the VA hospital, his eyes hollow but flickering with hope when Elias promised to find something to lift his spirits. This jacket wasn't just fabric. It was a lifeline, a reminder of who they both were, soldiers, survivors. Elias's bad knee ached, but he stood taller, his voice steady as he spoke to Karen. "Ma'am, all I want is to pay for this and go. You don't need to make this harder than it is." His words were calm, but they carried the weight of a man who'd faced death and come back stronger. Karen's eyes darted to the door, then to the teenager's phone, where the live stream's view count ticked past 1,000. She swallowed hard, her acrylic nails clicking nervously against the counter. "This is a misunderstanding," she stammered, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We can sort this out, sir. Just put the jacket back and we'll talk." Tyler nodded, stepping forward as if to grab the uniform, but Elias's hand shot out, pinning it to the counter. "Don't touch it," he said, his voice low but sharp like a blade drawn from its sheath. Tyler froze, his bravado crumbling under Elias's gaze. The door rattled again, and the crowd's chants grew louder, punctuated by the roar of motorcycle engines idling in the parking lot. A new voice cut through the noise, deep, commanding, and unmistakable. "Enough of this nonsense!" Everyone turned as a man in a crisp ROTC instructor's uniform pushed through the cadets, his silver hair catching the light. His name tag read Colonel Hayes, and his presence silenced the crowd like a general entering a battlefield. He glared through the glass at Karen, his voice booming. "Open this door now, or I'll have every veteran in this county out here by sundown." Karen's face drained of color. She fumbled with the phone, muttering, "Tyler, unlock it." Tyler hesitated, glancing at the teenager's phone, but a sharp look from Karen sent him scrambling to the door. The lock clicked, and the door swung open, letting in a rush of warm air and the crowd's cheers. Colonel Hayes strode in, the cadets behind him, their boots thudding on the linoleum. The flag-bearer stood at attention, the stars and stripes a silent rebuke to the store's indifference. The teenager zoomed in, his stream now flooded with heart emojis and angry faces. Hayes stopped in front of Elias, his eyes softening as he took in the old man's weathered face and the uniform on the counter. "Sergeant Carter?" he asked, his voice quieter now, respectful. Elias blinked, startled. "How'd you know my name?" Hayes nodded at the wallet on the counter where Elias's VA card was visible. "I make it my business to know the men who served. You're a hero, sir. This," he gestured at the scene, "shouldn't be happening." He turned to Karen, his gaze hardening. "You've got 1 minute to explain why you're disrespecting a decorated veteran." Karen stammered, her hands fluttering. "It's store policy, sir. We need to price specialty items. I didn't mean—" Hayes cut her off with a raised hand. "Policy? This man fought for your freedom and you're hiding behind paperwork?" The crowd outside hissed, and a man in a trucker hat shouted, "Shame on you!" Karen flinched, her eyes welling up, but Elias felt no pity, only a quiet resolve. He'd seen too many excuses in his life to believe hers. Hayes turned to the cadets. "Cadet Ramirez, get the name of this store and its corporate office." A young woman nodded, pulling out a notebook. Hayes then looked at Elias, his voice firm but kind. "Sergeant, you're walking out with that uniform. No charge. If they argue, they'll answer to me." He pulled a crisp 20 from his wallet and slapped it on the counter. "Ring it up," he told Karen, who nodded mutely, her hands shaking as she punched keys on the register. The crowd erupted in cheers, and the teenager whooped, his phone capturing every second. Elias felt a lump in his throat as he folded the uniform carefully, its weight a reminder of the kid at the VA. He met Hayes' eyes and nodded, a soldier's acknowledgement. "Thank you, Colonel," he said, his voice thick. Hayes clasped his shoulder, then turned to the crowd, raising a hand for silence. "This man is why we serve," he said, his voice carrying to the news van's microphone. "Never forget that." As Elias stepped outside, the cadets saluted, and the crowd parted, their applause washing over him like a warm tide. A young girl in pigtails ran up, pressing a folded flag sticker into his hand. "For you, mister," she said, her eyes wide with awe. Elias smiled, tucking the sticker into his wallet beside the photo of his platoon. He limped toward the diner, the uniform under his arm feeling lighter than he had in years. Behind him, Karen stood in the doorway, her face crumpled, while Tyler slunk back to the counter, avoiding the teenager's camera. The news van's reporter rushed forward, but Elias waved her off. He didn't need headlines. He had the jacket, the respect of the cadets, and the memory of a moment when justice won. As he sat at the diner counter sipping black coffee, he thought of the young vet, picturing the smile that jacket would bring. For the first time in a long time, Elias felt seen, not as an old man, but as a soldier, a hero, a man who still mattered.